quotes, but if they want to go through it themselves. All right, let's see. So just to make sure, when I present this, can you see me changing the slides?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay, cool. All right, so today's topic is going to be something a little bit different, but I think you guys are going to enjoy it. My hope is that you guys are going to enjoy it. And we are going to focus on Cubism. And just to make sure anybody can just sound off, I can't really see everybody right now. Do the majority of y'all, have y'all pretty much heard of Cubism? You know the main players?
In a very broad and vague sense, yeah. I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No, you're fine.
In a very broad sense, yes. Like, I'm not gonna lie, the name Cezanne sounds at best vaguely familiar. I think, didn't Picasso do something with Cubism too?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about as much as I am familiar with the topic.
Okay, that's totally fine. So this is going to be sort of like an introduction into that, and we're going to kind of talk about Cubism, not as a quote unquote philosophy, but you know, basically what Picasso and other major players of Cubism were trying to do. So let me now minimize. I can't see my own little cursor. Hold on. I want to minimize the camera so I can actually see the presentation. Okay, so let's start with these two quotes to kind of get y'all situated into Cubism. Because, you know, maybe y'all have seen works of Picasso. You guys have maybe have this preconceived notion that Cubism needs to fit a certain mold and a certain style. And that's not necessarily true. So the two quotes I have here are from Picasso and Georges Braque, and these are basically who we would call like the co-founders of Cubism. So the first one we have is states, "When we invented Cubism, we had no intention whatsoever of inventing Cubism." And Georges Braque goes on to say, "Mathematics, trigonometry, chemistry, psychoanalysis, music, and whatnot have been related to Cubism to give it an easier interpretation. All this has been pure literature, not to say nonsense, which brought bad results, blinding people with theories." So that's kind of what I want y'all to do at this moment, is to just take any preconceived notion that you have about Cubism and just throw it out the window. It's not going to help you at all. And so let's start with something that does look familiar. You know, maybe I certainly had this thought previously. You know, I had the thought, modern art is somehow inferior to the classics. Modern art is done by people who don't know how to paint, who just throw something on a canvas and they call it art, and somebody at a gallery values it at $1 million and they become famous. Which, you know, cynically speaking, might be true, but it's not necessarily always the truth. And we can see here, you know, two early paintings from Pablo Picasso. And you see that these both are dated 1895. And just for reference, Pablo Picasso was born in 1881. So at the age of 14, he's already, you know, a very skilled painter and is able to paint in this very, you know, realist style. And he's been doing this since the age of 8. And so that really leads us into how Cubism even got started. And so I know that this seems completely like out of left field, but if we take a step back and look at the history of Cubism, we can see that its origins don't necessarily just stem from Europe, but from Africa. And so what we see here are two statues. On the left is one owned by Henri Matisse, and the other is a reliquary guardian figure from Gabon and the Republic of Congo. And so in 1907, Picasso's friend Matisse brought this statue over for them to look at together. And according to Matisse, they were completely enthralled by the figure and its depiction of the human figure itself. And so during this time, Picasso was in Paris, and there was an exhibition on African masks at a museum called the Trocadero Museum of Ethnology. And of this encounter, of his visit to the exhibition, Picasso says, "A smell of mold and neglect caught me by the throat. I was so depressed that I would have chosen to leave immediately. But I forced myself to stay, to examine these masks, all these objects that people had created with a sacred, magical purpose, to serve as intermediaries between them and the unknown, hostile forces surrounding them, attempting in that way to overcome their fears by giving them color and form. And then I understood what painting really meant. It's not an aesthetic process. It's a form of magic that interposes itself between us and the hostile universe, a means of seizing power by imposing a form on our terrors as well as on our desires. The day I understood that, I had found my path." And so, you know, when we're really looking at these figures, what I would like you guys to start seeing, and what the Cubists started to see, is how these, you know, African masks or these African statues depicted the human figure in very simple shapes. So we see that the face no longer has like a clear set jawbone or, you know, high cheekbones. We just see like this nice oval shape. We see the two circles for eyes and just, you know, a triangle for a nose. There's just simply like a patterning for maybe the mouth, and the entire, you know, if we can even call what's underneath the mask a body, it's just, you know, a diamond, as y'all can see. So, you know, what we really begin to see here is how the African masks and the statues are not necessarily depicting the human figure as it is, but as they have chosen to give emphasis to whatever feature they are trying to bring more attention to. So, you know, compared to the left and the right, we see the change in the eye shape. You could say that the statue on the left, you know, values the eye more, you know, and perhaps the mouth, because the mouth is completely, you know, depicted, whereas on the right side, it's not. So you begin to, you know, see these things and ask yourselves the question, what are these sculptors really trying to get across? What are the things that seem important to them, and why might they seem important to them? And so a second highly important influence on the Cubist movement is something that seems also completely unrelated, and that is the work of Paul Cézanne. So Paul Cézanne is working in the late 1800s, and you know, if at a cursory glance into this painting, you might think, well, what does this have to do with Cubism? But in asking Picasso and Braque this question, they would undoubtedly tell you that Cézanne, it was an enormous influence on them, and they even call him the father of modern art. And so whether or not Cézanne intended to make his artworks in this particular fashion to explore these new prevailing theories that Picasso and Braque interpreted is somewhat of a moot point, because what we're really trying to see here is what Picasso and Braque interpreted and extrapolated from these paintings to make them so important as to create an entirely new style of painting. And so there's really two key things here that the Cubists saw in Cézanne's works that influenced them the most. And those would be geometry and perspective. So we're going to start seeing this right here. So we can see here in this painting by Paul Cézanne how the landscape is slowly being broken down into these forms. You know, when we would see a quarry like this, we might not exactly see such a straight edge, such as is featured in the background. We might not see that in real life like that. And so what we're really seeing is how Paul Cézanne is beginning to break the landscape down into these sort of volumes and these forms that, you know, are more comprehensible to us as viewers. And so even though Cézanne was mainly attempting to create volume through the color planes, so the Cubists were able to see in his paintings this tendency to represent nature with the geometric shapes, which is very central to the early development of Cubism. So the second element, as I mentioned, was perspective. So here we have Cézanne's still life with apples and oranges, and we can see this clear beginning of a rejection of perspective. You know, as you look at this painting more and more, you start to see that things don't quite make sense as they should. So we see the table, you know, is kind of sliding down towards us. And if we were to follow that same perspective of the table, we would imagine that the apples and oranges might be foreshortened in a different way, that they wouldn't seem so head on. But the apples and oranges have their own grouping and their own perspective, their own viewpoint. The table has its own. The plate that the apples are on is somehow coming towards us in the complete opposite direction of the table. The picture in the back is also just completely on its own plane of existence, so to speak. And so, you know, each of these objects is operating in its own independent space, completely unrelated to the objects around it. And this is where we reach Cubism. So the painting on the right is Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And this is arguably the very first Cubist painting in history, which is heavily influenced by Cézanne's female bathers in front of a tent, where you can see a similarity in the females' poses, in the women's poses, as well as the draping of the cloth in the background. If you can't see the cloth in Picasso's painting, it is what the white and the blue shapes are denoting. So here you see the underpinnings of Cubism coming to fruition. So the main quote unquote philosophy, if you can really call it that, I wouldn't really go so far as to say philosophy, because that would suggest that, you know, they thought through these things in a way that they organized it. Anyways, it's essentially a rejection of an attempt to create illusion within paintings. So what we've been working on right now with our still lives is we've been working on methods to create or give the illusion of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional surface or paper. And how, you know, we come to butt heads with this, because how exactly can we accurately do this? And so what the cubists here are beginning to value is the two-dimensional surface as, you know, as the ultimate form of depiction. And what I mean by that is that instead of trying to give the illusion of 3D on 2D, they're trying to take a 3D object and essentially unfold it so that you can see every single side of the object at the exact same time. So the Cubist works represent this sort of simultaneous, simultaneous relationship between shapes and surfaces of objects from these different perspectives. So the objects begin to be analyzed in terms of facets at shallow angles to the picture surface, and they're no longer receding from the eye. And so cubists are also employing various techniques to realize sort of what they would call a full experience of space. So there's what you could also say is that they're taking a moment in time. So what would it look like if you could take a moment in time and look at every single angle of an object, but only from one side, only from one viewpoint? What would that look like? How would that be imagined? And so, and then we're placing that onto the two-dimensional plane. So there's no real agreed way upon how this occurs. You know, the beauty of Cubism is this mode of thinking that you as an artist internalize. So there's no specific way that you can say, well, this is how a three-dimensional object needs to look on a two-dimensional plane. This is where you begin to disseminate the work, where you begin to break it down, and where you begin to view things as, you know, and how they're presented to you. And so I want to take another little step back and sort of consider these two female nudes that are side by side here. So on the left, we have William Adolphe Bouguereau's Birth of Venus, which is a realist painting, as we can see. You know, the main figure has been very skillfully painted in proportion to the figures around her. And now, so we look on the right, we have Picasso's Dryad. And it's also obviously of a nude woman, but remarkably different in appearance. And so we begin to notice this notion of Cubism about how the body is being broken down into these, you know, forms and shapes. And it doesn't necessarily make sense in terms of perspective, but we can still understand fully that this is a female form. And we can see in the painting the, you know, the influence of the African art of Cézanne coming through in these paintings, in this painting that Picasso has created. We can see how the color planes are creating these different volumes and forms, and how, you know, the face, for example, is being broken down into this almost, I guess, essentialist way or mode of thinking. So you know, the goal of Cubism isn't necessarily to make something completely unrecognizable to the viewer. because as you guys can see, you can clearly understand that this is a female nude. The goal is really just to like I said before, to capture this moment in time, to maybe capture the essence of what is being depicted. And so, you know, this, if we take a more in-depth look at the dryad, it's not such a mysterious concept if you guys, you know, take a step back and look at what you have been learning this semester so far. There are things here, you know, that we've been learning this entire time that are coming into play with Cubism. It's just, you know, somewhat unfamiliar to you at the moment. But, you know, if you take a look at, for example, the stomach of the woman, at her torso, you can see here in this close-up, you can see the square shape coming in, and you can see that it looks very much like a cube or a form that you might have created before in your mass conception works. And so, you know, as you're looking at these close-ups, understand that, you know, Cubism is not necessarily just about like fragmenting and breaking things up. It's about trying to create an understanding of what it would look like if, for example, with the close-up of the foot, if you could see a side of a foot, but from every single angle. If we look back at the painting before, you would see how like the left, on the left, the heel of the woman has been foreshortened. You wouldn't see it as much. And then you look at the right here, you look at this foot, and it's just one big, nice, flat plane, which, you know, doesn't necessarily make sense, but that's not really what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make, you know, realistic sense. We're trying to make sense in a different way. So that's really what I'm trying to get across. So this is sort of the precursor and the introduction to the assignment that you guys are going to have for this week. And can you guys still see my screen? Can you now see the assignment on the screen?
The assignment, no.
No? Okay. How do I new share? Okay, there we go. Can you see it now?
We can, yes.
Okay, cool. So all this leads into the assignment of this week, which is, as you might have guessed, a Cubism assignment. So to start, I have another quote, because who doesn't love a quote, by Robert Beverly Hale, and it's, "Have I made it clear that drawing is not a mere act of copying, but a highly creative act controlled by the artist's expressive intent?" And that's really what I want to drive home with this assignment. What I would really like for you guys to do is to show your intent with it. And so I'll discuss it further when we get down to the bottom, because I've set up the rubric, because I don't want you guys to freak out or think that like I want something specific from y'all, because I don't. So anyways, so let's go through the introduction. Drawing is not always about mimicking what is seen right in front of you. Often it helps to break down the object into more understandable forms, such as cubes, cones, spheres, etc. This homework assignment is not just about copying the Cubist style, but about interpreting the objects in front of you and translating them onto paper. Up until now, we've been using methods of drawing that will create the illusion of 3D on 2D. But what if we want to see all sides of something at the same time? What would that look like? Consider the difference between volume, form, and shape as you go about creating your studies and final still life. The most important thing to remember is that this assignment is as much an attempt to capture everything at the same time as it is an interpretive drawing. There is no quote unquote right way to draw Cubism, and one student's drawing of a book may look wildly different from another student's. So for the materials, you're gonna need your drawing pad, the pencil set with multiple weights or whatever pencil set you have. Just make sure that you get like at least 5 or 6 different weights, because that will be extremely helpful for you. And one Cray-Pas oil pastel in the color of your choice. So that should have been in your kit. If not, you can just get another oil pastel. If you don't have an oil pastel, you can use a colored pencil. It's just to add something to it. And then we want 4 separate items to build a still life. And, you know, try to find items that vary, oh wow, I misspelled vary in height, bulk, shape, etc. And a chair or a stool without a backrest or a nightstand, essentially something that you can place the items on and that you're going to be able to move around. And then you want the clamp light or another light that can easily be moved as well. So into the assignment. So Cubism challenges viewers to understand a subject broken down into its geometric components and represent them from several angles at once, you know, as we've said before. This assignment will ask you to represent objects in a way that focuses on the form and shape, as well as depicting many viewpoints at one time. The final outcome is to create a still life that combines both the newly learned elements of Cubism with all the previous techniques we've learned up to this point. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select our objects. For each individual object, you're going to place it on top of your chair, nightstand, whatever you have in the center of your room. You will want to give yourself enough space to move around the object. Using the clamp light or another adjustable light, cast a shadow on the object so that each angle shows variation in shading. So for our study sketches, we're going to start from any side of the object you want and sketch what you see into an 8x8 square, focusing on the forms and shapes you see within the object. After finishing one side, move 90 degrees around the object and repeat what you've done for a total of 4 different angles drawn into the study. So if you're having trouble finding a nightstand or a backless chair that can be easily moved around, it doesn't have to exactly be 90 degrees. You can pick a different viewpoint, such as viewing the object from the top or from underneath if it's clear, if it's a clear surface. It doesn't necessarily matter as much what the angles are, so much that you're getting 4 separate viewpoints. Decide for yourself how you want to represent the next side of the object and how you want it to continue on from the first part. You can use a combination of pencils plus 1 oil pastel to begin to denote some tone. For each item, spend a maximum of 10 minutes. These should be a quick study to familiarize yourself. So I gave you guys like a really quick visual aid of what we're trying to do with the study sketches. So here on the left, you know, I have my object, the clamp light casting a shadow down, and it's just sitting on this nice little stool. Mine, obviously, I can't get to the back of because I'm in a really tiny studio, but, you know, doesn't matter because it was for visual aid and it wasn't to do the assignment. So here you can see how your object should be organized. Make sure you have enough space, which I did not. And if you do not have a stool, that's okay. Get a view from a different way, basically, as long as you have 4 different viewpoints. And then you can see, you know, what my, you know, version of the bottle looks like. And we can see what I found to be, you know, the essence of the bottle, things that were important to me, things that stood out to me. So I took a view from the very front, and, you know, this form right here became more of an oval form. Suddenly, like this, you know, became a rectangle, and this just became a little like semicircle. And then I moved very quickly to the other side and, you know, just quickly sketched over another viewpoint and then put in another viewpoint. And then after that, I kind of went back in and just sort of started blocking and organizing the interactions in a way that I best saw fit. And this is why I really want you guys to use as many pencil weights as possible, because when I mean that you can use tone, I really don't want to, I don't want to encourage you guys to start doing like value and that kind of stuff. I really mean that you guys should just try like color blocking, using different weights to build like line or texture. You can see here, this one's just really rough on the bottom. And this one up top is a little like thicker, but you know, not as ragged. And so, you know, just like we were learning in mass conception, all objects are comprised of a series of forms and shapes. We break them down to this most basic form, they become more familiar to us and we're better able to draw them. Although cubism may seem difficult to grasp at first, just remember that there are no right ways as long as you're trying to get the basic shapes of each object on the page. Teehee. And so for the final still life, I want you to take the 4 objects that you used in your study sketches and arrange them all together on the surface you've been using. In your 18 by 24 drawing pad, continue in the same manner as the studies, this time paying extra attention to how the objects interact with each other, how some items may be obscured by other items, etc. Before moving the first time, so this is where it becomes a little different. So before you move the very first time, you're going to draw in the background of the objects using the techniques learned up until this point: mass conception, dominant diagonals, construction lines, etc. Final drawing should depict a combination of cubism as well as just a still life that we have learned up until this point. So what I mean by that is, like, here's a picture of 4 items that I've set atop my workbench, and you know, I position them in a way that creates some intrigue. You know, I put the headphones diagonally, put the hand sanitizer kind of like that. Could have probably done something else, but I think it gets the point across. So what you're gonna do is you're essentially gonna draw these first 4 items in the same cubist fashion that you have done your studies up until this point. Then everything else in the background, as well as the stool, is going to be drawn in using the key topics that we've learned up until this point. So what we would like to see is sort of this normal, quote unquote, still life from all around here, and then right in the center, your 4 items, kind of just breaking that up in whatever way you want. And it should just be like a nice juxtaposition of cubism as well as just like your still life in the background. And so for the final turn in, you're going to turn into both the assignment folder and the Padlet discussion board your 4 8x8 studies, JPEG or PNG, well cropped and photographed, and then 1 final 18 by 24 still life, well cropped and photographed as well. And last but not least, we're going to go ahead and look at the rubric. So where's the rubric? Oh, there. Just so you guys can understand exactly, can y'all see this rubric?
No, Professor, we cannot. But
No, it's stuck on the submission thing still.
Oh, thanks for calling me professor, though.
but and also, I do
can
have a
see it
question
now.
though. I'm sorry.
Okay. You had a question, Anthony?
Well, yes. So sorry, I thought I heard something else. Anyway. So so I'm understanding this correctly. So like for the 4 8x8s, is like 1 8x8 like say like side 1, and then like the second 8x8 like side 2, so on and so forth?
No. So 1 8x8 is going to be object 1.
Okay.
So you would draw the front.
Okay.
And then you would move yourself.
Okay.
And you would draw the side on top of the front, or however you see fit. to show that interaction, to show how it's, you know, in coming together, and to show how you're essentially taking this object and like, if you could essentially like cut it, make a seam, and then like undo that seam, what would that look like if it just
Okay.
kind of like unfolded out like that? And so
Okay.
each study is one object from 4 different viewpoints.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and so I'm assuming the same logic applies to the final, but but we're just taking all 4 objects and combining them together.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So yeah, so let's go over the rubric, because as I said in the beginning, I really don't want you guys to think like I want you to come up with the next great Picasso. I want you guys to just understand the concept, and I want to see that you guys are trying to work through this yourself. So really, conceivably, you know, none of you should fail this assignment, because I'm giving like 60 points just for like composition and setup, the material use, as well as like your craft and submission. So if you just do those just fine, like you're gonna already get like 60 points out of 100. So for composition and setup, what I mean is like, you followed the directions. You put an object on top of something. You show, you know, superb variety that gives you excellent opportunities for exploration, and your final setup is, your final still life setup is organized in a dynamic and engaging manner. And so obviously it goes from like excellent to good to average to poor. For the study sketches, like to get an excellent, what I just really want to see is that you have shown a clear and deliberate observation of the chosen objects, as well as exploration of at least 4 different viewpoints. If you want to do more, that's fine, but I'm not asking you to do more. And then that you provide 4 different 8x8 studies. So if you do the 4, and if you're just showing the a deliberate effort to observe something in a new way, you'll get the full points. Final still life will be, you know, combining both the practiced elements of Cubism with the previous learned topics. So just make sure that we can see the construction lines, the dominant diagonals, etc., that are being used to build out the background of the final still life. And then you use almost all of the 18 by 24 inch pad. So really, you know, the drawing should take up like the entirety of the page. Don't just draw like a tiny still life like in the center of the page, draw like on the full pad. And then we have the materiality, excellent use of materials, clear use of different pencil weights and oil pastel in the study sketches and the final still life, show a thorough exploration of line weight, texture, and color blocking to create interest and dynamism. And finally, we have craft, successful submission of all assignment elements, both in Padlet and assignment folder in JPEG format, well cropped and well lit. And then we just have the overall score breakdown. So yes, Anthony.
Yeah, so another question as well. So
Sure.
how exactly are we supposed to draw, and I mean this in all seriousness, like how are we supposed to draw all 4 sides of the object in the same still life?
That is the point of the assignment.
Forgive
Is
me,
to find out how.
forgive me, I thrive off of clarity.
No, that's absolutely fine. And that's what I really want to drive home is the point of this assignment is to try to wrestle through that yourself. It's not about how I would do it, it's about how you would do it. How would you depict all 4 items together?
Well, if I'm being honest, I'd probably break the 8x8 into 4 equal sections and do it, but I know that's not how you would like the assignment to be completed.
Well,
So
yeah,
I
because
have to.
that's not Cubism. Cubism, we're attempting to just put it all, we're just like flattening it. Like if you took a steamroller and like flattened an object, Like, what would it look like? Yeah. So that's why I'm really trying to tell you, like, there's no right way to do this. And I don't want you guys to get bogged down by like, am I doing cubism correctly? Because there's no point in me trying to like grade you on that basis. What I want to see is that, you know, you're wrestling through this question, like, if I take an image or an object and I draw it from the front, and now I move myself and I draw it from the side, but they still have to sort of both appear at the same time, what does that look like? Does it look weird? How do the shapes come together? And so that's what we're really trying to do. We're just trying to take those shapes and like really see the interaction between them. So
Oh, no, you're making perfect sense. I'm just trying to figure out logically how to do this in my head. Like, I'm just trying to like do like the geometry in my head right now, and it's just turning into a mess.
don't do the geometry. There's no geometry involved at all. It's simply an exploration of what you believe the object looks like. It's just your interpretation. And that's what's beautiful about it, is just like, as long as I can see that you're interpreting something in a certain way, then you've done it. You've completed it. You're a cubist.
Thank you, Professor, for the clarity. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm not a professor yet, but I strive to be. You can just call me Ursula for now.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the final, are we just supposed to like draw it from one angle and then like?
So for the final, since you guys do have 4 objects, I did, I think I put it in the caption of the main image. You can do fewer viewpoints of the object from in the final still life. So you can do like 1 to 2 viewpoints of the 4 objects together.
Okay.
Since you already have the 4 like from the front view, and you're already going to be working and wrestling with that, you don't have to do like 4 completely different viewpoints.
So basically we just draw it from like 1 or 2 viewpoints and like that's it.
And then the background, everything that's in the background of the 4 objects, you're also going to draw that in, but you're just going to draw that in as a regular still life, as you have been doing up until this point. So it should be like an interesting blend between like what you have been doing and then this like weird like fragmented break in like reality in the front.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Anthony.
So to clarify though, building on that point though of the background at least, like as you move around the object though, the at least in my situation, the background is bound to change. Like on one side there's a desk, on the other side there's a closet, on the other side, I don't know if you can see, there's a vertical chessboard. How are we supposed to like, is the background itself, like how are we supposed to make that work exactly?
Okay, so for the background, sorry if I wasn't very clear in the explanation. So for the background of the final still life, the way that you're going to draw that is when you begin, you'll have your very first view. So like say that I'm your still life. So this would be the object that you're making in cubist form. And then before you get up and move to get the side of the object, you're going to draw everything else in the background. You're just going to draw in the background. And you're just going to draw in the background from that first initial view. And then, so the only thing you're doing when you're moving is you're just drawing the objects. And then if you need to like erase some parts of the background that, you know, might get obstructed, then you can do that. But really like the background is just going to be from that very first view. Does that clarify?
Yes, Professor. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Well, I really hope that you guys enjoy this assignment. I know it's something that seems very abstract and unimaginable at this point. And you know, it might take a little bit to just get into the groove of it, but don't be afraid to make some weird stuff. Like that's kind of the fun of it, is like to see what it looks like to you. That's ultimately what I want to see, is like what does a bottle look like to, you know, let's see some names. What does a bottle look like to Greg or Sean? What does a bottle look like? What does a phone look like? So it doesn't need to be a real representation. It's like your interpretation and representation of it. So have fun. It should be a lighthearted, fun assignment. And I hope to give everybody an A. So, Ben, if you're still around.